Hello and welcome back, and I know you're thinking you've come to this video to see this, the hardware review of the HS-264, the Silent NAS, but let's be honest, let's address the copper-covered elephant in the room. Is it better than this? This is its predecessor, the HS-453DX. This is the NILF. It is the video that I made about this product that I still maintain to this day is one of the best looking NASes I've ever seen. And although I'm not going to mention this too much in this video, I think it would be fair to say that it's going to be a presence throughout this. So let's go ahead, unbox this bad boy and talk a little bit about what it can do, what it can't do, and the very definition of what Silent NAS actually means. So, the Silent NAS. This has been an existing series from QNAP for a number of years. Now, QNAP have got quite a lot of hardware solutions in their portfolio. I think that'd be fair to say that they've probably covered into the hundreds just over the last few years. And although they are quite diverse in their CPU and the ports and a number of bays and more, they generally follow a very similar formula one after the other. They are desktop or rack mount solutions that use a very similar physical architecture, but that's what has always made the Silent NAS series a little bit different, because it's not just that word silent in terms of audibility and ambient noise, it is the physical stature of the system. It's meant to have as lower impact. When you hear about people talking about a NAS being set up and forget and just chuck it in the corner and do its job, this is very much the epitome of all of that rhetoric. And although it's only a 2-bay system, it still is probably one of the most low impact and discrete systems that we've talked about on the channel. Not so much just this system, but the entire range as a whole. Now, it knocks around for about 5 to 550 nickel, which on the face of it, let's be honest, for a 2-bay, is a bit of a steep incline when you can pick up 2 bays of a not dissimilar hardware architecture to this for about 350, or give or take. Now, why is this expensive compared to those? Well, it is that keyword silent. I know I keep repeating it, but I think it's very important going into this video, before you go any further, understanding what that means. Now, this system, if you installed a couple of SSDs like this inside there, this system would truly be silent. It's fanless. It takes advantage of a heat dissipation system internally that allows it to not have to be overly reliant on active cooling. It doesn't really use ventilation in the same way other NASes do, and relies on a large heat dissipation panel on the top to draw heat via thermal pads and silicon paste out of the individual components and those other heat sinks and dissipate it into the air. Now, as silent as that might be, a number of people, you may have read in the comments, or if you looked at previous Silent NAS systems, such as the 251 Plus, or that NAS down there, the HS-453DX, they have said they've got the NAS and it's not actually silent. Now, that's because those users didn't really think about the noise that these make. These are hard drives. You may be familiar with them over the last 20 or 30 years. Now, more conventional, easy to access hard drives like these ones, this is a WD Red 4TB. This is quite a quiet hard drive. It hums, it clicks, it whirs. It's made up of platters inside that are read by an actuator, which is a tiny little arm that flicks between all the individual layers of it to access your data. The more data you have, the more spread out it is, the more that actuator is going to go nuts there in the background. Now, it's not a vastly noisy drive, but it is going to hum. It's going to vibrate. We're going to do a whole video on drive noise coming very, very soon. But if you go for hard drives, non-pro, non-enterprise, and you go under about 8 TB, they're generally a lot quieter. If you look at WD and Seagate, generally WD hard drives under 8 TB are quieter. Weirdly, when you go higher than 8 TB, WD ends up being louder than Seagate. So it's a weird transitional point between them. But the point I'm making is, with this drive inside this system, the system is making no noise. The noise is being generated by the drive. The bigger the drives are, the more they're going to vibrate, the more they're going to hum, and the more they're going to click, hum, and whir as the actuator is reading. Nevertheless, unlike other systems that would have that drive inside, that will have a rated dB level of between 26 and upper 20s as well in their active use, this system, this 2-bay, because it doesn't have that fan, can be quieter with 2 hard drives inside than when it's in active use than to conventional 2-bay NAS systems when they are on standby. And that's because the system's ambient noise levels in that fan aren't being introduced into it. Now, why is all this important in this long introduction? Well, because of drives like this. bigger hard drives. People are looking at 2 bays and going, man alive, I can get 20 TB hard drives these days. A couple of them in there, bosh, 40 TB. Well, these drives, they're not the quietest. They're pretty noisy. All more than 8 or 10 TB drives are just noisier. They use things like helium sealing, they use heat-assisted magnetic recording and energy-assisted magnetic recording, and the ultimate result of that is that these drives make more noise during access. They have to spin up faster, they've got more components inside to be engaged with read-write activities, and the ultimate result is that if you put larger drives inside these systems, have a look at those comments I mentioned earlier on other videos where they talk about this thing not being the quietest. Look at what drives they're using, and I guarantee they are 10 or 12 TBs and above, and that's the key point. This system is silent. These are not. And that's the big differentiating point I think a lot of you should take on board before you invest inside this system, because you might be looking at a system like this and you're not going to be using silent drives, and then you'll come away disappointed that the system's silence is not really apparent. But this has been a long intro. Let's have a quick old look inside this system. We're going to get the unboxing part of this video out of the way. You may have already noticed that the retail box between this and its predecessor is significantly different. Now, that is because a lot of the hardware architecture inside this, it's not as diverse, and its heat and dissipation across over space doesn't need to be so broad. The system is around 4 centimeters in height. I believe it's 30 centimeters wide and 22 centimeters deep. If you have a little look, all of the accessories come out in a single swipe like that. We've got plenty of that hard foam in there. You guys know how I feel about well-packed devices there. We've got our accessories there on the side. Let's remove our foam, get rid of that behind us, get rid of that. And we can have a little look at the unit inside there. We will get to the accessories in a moment. Now, let's get that off of there. That took a lot longer than expected, didn't it? Okay, there is our system there at the front. As you can see, its stature compared to a lot of 2 bays is a great deal more discreet. As mentioned, this top panel, metal panel there at the top, acting as heat dissipation. We will be removing that in just a moment. Let's have a little look at the accessories we get with our NAS. Open that up inside there, and what we get for our money, we've got a quick start installation guide there, expected. We have got information on extending the warranty to 5 years. This system arrives with 2 years of manufacturer's warranty. More information on that limited warranty as well. We have a mains power cable there, and again, it's a standard kettle 3-pin there at the back. We have an external PSU there, which is quite good to see. This is a 60 watt PSU, which is notably lower than the 90 watt in the previous unit. But again, that one had a 90 watt PSU for a reason I will get onto later on. And we've got screws there for 2.5 inch and 3.5 inch hard drives inside there. And finally, we have got our Cat 5e cable there. Not Cat 6, but again, this isn't a 10G NAS, so it's not going to need any kind of beefier cables than that. So let's have a little look at this system nice and close. Move that out of shot. So as we can see, there is the front panel of the system. As mentioned, we will be doing audio noise testing on this to kind of demonstrate that point about SSDs versus conventional hard drives versus enterprise hard drives later on. But as you can see, it is incredibly low-level box there. Just to put that into a little bit of perspective there, here we go. We look at that hard drive. There's not much more to it than that hard drive, is there? And again, there are 2 bays of storage in this system. And that's quite a low-level bay there inside there. Now, the thickness of that at the top you're going to be seeing later on. But if we remove this magnetic front panel here, don't worry, those magnets are far enough away from the drives. You can see there are our 2 storage bays inside there, all the way along. And again, they do support 2.5 inch and 3.5 inch drives to be installed inside there. And again, when it comes to the drives that you install in here, it does support up to 20 TB drives, which I'm sure everyone's going to make a big song and dance about in 2 bays, but just remember about that noise. You may be completely invalidating the very concept of a silent NAS there. Again, it takes advantage of metal trays. Normally, metal trays, I would talk about noise, but of course, in this case, add as much heat dissipation as possible is going to be key. Now again, 2.5 inch, 3.5 inch holes inside there. If we pop those to one side, move those bays out, we can have a little look there at the back. You can see SATA connectors. If we bring that there with the light going all the way through, you can see no like random wires in there. We're not getting any split data and power cabling there, although it doesn't have the standard backplane attachment, and that is because airflow is absolutely crucial in a system like this. We've done a lot more photos down in the comments over on NAS Compares, detailing a lot more about the design of this system. Now, that metal dissipation panel there on the top, it's going to get hot. It's not going to get fry an egg hot, but it's going to get warm. So one of the things a lot of people should probably know about a system like this is, although it's quite discreet and doesn't look unlike a DVD or Blu-ray player that you've got knocking around at your dad's place, it's worth highlighting that the heat dissipation from this works at its best when it's got some nice airflow around. It doesn't have to be active airflow, it's just got to be ambient air. Slitting it inside a drawer area there is going to be very counterproductive. Also, it's worth highlighting, even though it is, 4 centimeters in height, it's still that size. So it's not like you can stick it on your desk and go, oh, I've saved all this room. You've still used up all of this room. And do remember, if you place something on it, that's a terrible thing to do. So remember, it is small in its height stature, but deeper in every other regard. I'd say this is kind of a similar placement level as maybe a 6-bay there. Now, if we go to the back of this device, we can talk a little bit about these ports. And this is where I know there's going to be mixed feelings about this device. Let's talk about what I like first. I like, for example, the USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports there at 10 gigabits per second. So again, you've got access there to use much faster USB drives for that external storage, which is always going to be advantageous. On top of that, we've got a couple of 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports there. So again, network connectivity on the 2 drives inside this system. Even if you are going to be taking advantage of standard hard drives that give you somewhere between 160 to 200 megabytes per second in a RAID 0 or RAID 1 environment, you're still not going to exceed the saturation point of those two. But if you use SSDs, however, you will be able to saturate the potential joint link aggregated 5 gigabit Ethernet there, utilizing those 2 drives. Also, we've got HDMI out, and I think HDMI on all of these systems has never made more sense than in a system like this, which is going to be just in place in a multimedia setting. If you can have it underneath your box, your TV or whatever, and you want to connect via 4K there and connect it directly to your TV and enjoy your little remote control and enjoy all your media, that's fantastic. But there you go, that's one of the things I'm not keen on with this system. It doesn't have a remote control. Now, QNAP have remote controls. They've been, a lot of their solutions used to arrive with different infrared remote controls and even detailed useful ones as well. However, this system, which I think is one of the most geared towards multimedia, does not include that as an option, which is a real disappointment, really, not having that, because it would only cost an extra 20, at most at production. And those remotes are very, very cheap on their own. You can use Wi-Fi remotes and other supported IR remotes, but I think this system could really benefit from that. Now, those 2 HDMI ports, another thing that a lot of people maybe get wrong about a lot of QNAP systems, and to their, in their, defense, they shouldn't have to think it one way or the other. These HDMI ports, even though there's 2 of them, they can't be used for parallel instances of output. So you can either use them to do a shared screen, so it mirrors one screen twice, or you can do an extended screen across 2 different HDMI supported monitors. They can't be used for parallel instances, which is a real shame given that the QNAP platform supports multi-user and multi-client software environments there. It would have been great to use those as different monitored services. Maybe one for your HDMI out and another one as a standalone PC or multimedia there in a second monitor. Now, why was it that I said that a number of you would have a spot of bother about these ports? And again, that brings us back to this bad boy. Now, why am I bringing it up once again? Because the 453DX featured 10 gigabit Ethernet. This 10 GBE system here, the older one, the one that this is replacing, had 10 gigabit Ethernet. But moreover than that, this system had 2 hard drive bays and 2 SSD bays. It had 2 SATA SSD bays, making it technically a 4-bay system, with those SSDs being used for caching or as a raw storage pool. The result is that although this system is the latest follow-up, it lacks some of the features that I think a lot of users really wanted to see. And although this arrives with the same modern architecture of a number of recent 64 series NASs from QNAP, it doesn't support all of those features. It doesn't have PCIe upgradability. It doesn't have support for more than 4 gig of memory internally there. And its lack of 10 GBE and lack of that PCIe upgradability and that lack of that memory going beyond 8 gig, for me, even though it arrives with 8 gig by default, really lets this system down compared to its predecessor. That said, there is over $200 of price difference between these two. So if you were never going to use 10G to start with, you were never going to use SSD base to start with, and never going to use more than 8 gig of memory to start with, that makes this system make a great deal more sense there. So the next thing I want to do is get into the inside of this system and have a good look at those internal components. Before I do so though, I've just noticed something quite cool. The base of the system has got further heat sinks, and these heat sinks here are from the inside of the system that have been allowed to be exposed there to the air. That's quite a unique choice, and at the base there we can see those rubberized feet raising this system a little bit higher than most of the systems we're used to covering here on the channel. Now, these panels here also are where the system has its screws. So what I'm going to do is remove these and access the internals of this system and show off some of that internal hardware. Okay, so we've removed the lid, and I'll be honest with you, I'm really impressed and slightly quite scared by what I'm seeing here. If we remove that top there, that is the full contents. It looks like almost the entirety of the internal components, the CPU and that memory module, is located there underneath a small, very narrow but fully complemented heatsink there. That was the heatsink that was being revealed there by that main panel. Everything here at the top seems to be a light controller board that's connected to it, but there's no PCIe kind of bridge connector here. This is one singular T-shaped controller board there, and again, fair play to QNAP here. I've never seen this, so it's clearly quite a unique design. Again, this whole thing at the bottom here, this is that heat panel there at the base. Now, what I think we should do now is remove some of these screws here. We've got 3 screws to remove, so let's have a little look at that CPU and memory inside, because I have a sneaking suspicion this system uses soldered memory there rather than SODIMMs in order to allow that dissipation of heat. Maybe I'll be wrong. Let's have a little look there. Now, as we remove this, and again, we will be setting this device up for the likes of Plex Media Server, as well as utilising some of those audio tests very, very soon. But if we have a little look there, we've still got to remove that screw a little bit more there inside. We can have a little look at that CPU and chip arrangement inside there. This takes advantage of the N5105, that CPU, a newer generation over the 4115 that came before it. The old 453DX was one of the few systems to not arrive with the 45125, an older generation CPU in that family as well. Okay, so removing this heatsink has been very surprising. So first and foremost, there is that heatsink there, that big beefy heatsink there on the top. And if we look at the base of it, we can see not only have we got the larger dissipating heat panel, but we've got 2 large thermal pads there that are covering 2 key areas of this processor. So what we're noticing immediately is 1, the placement of the memory, but 2, and more importantly, the placement of the processor. This is going to be very, very important. Now, if we have a little look and look at the underside of this panel, we can see there the layout of those components and chips. Now, what is the first thing that's hitting you there? That's right. Where the hell is the CPU? It turns out the CPU is underneath this panel here, and the heat is being generated through it because that is the side that is our dissipating heat panel. So we're not going to get the CPU on this side. Now, we're probably going to take this apart a little bit more in detail over on the blog, but let's talk a little bit about that CPU, and we will talk about the memory in just a moment. Now, the CPU, as mentioned, is that the N5105. Now, that processor ranked, I believe it was 4, and we'll look at my notes there, 4,161 on CPU benchmark, is a marked improvement over that of the J4115 of its predecessor, which was ranked at 2,706 on CPU benchmark there. Now that CPU, 4K transcoding it can handle. It's got the HDMI out thanks to all those embedded graphics, and of course encryption, AES-NI encryption 256 on the system, so you can encrypt all that data internally. But I would still highlight that that CPU can support more than 8 gig of memory. This system arrives with 8 gig, and that 8 gig, as I suspected, as you can see from those 2 chips, is soldered memory. We've got 2 4 gig modules there of memory being on board. So that lack of going higher, or that upgradability, presumably in efforts to make sure the system maintains its temperature, is really, really disappointing because that CPU can handle more. And in previous videos where I've talked about the 64 series, and I've talked in a lot more detail about PCI lanes and the chipset and the CPU responsibilities and what it can handle, it is worth highlighting that we have seen this processor be able to stretch itself a lot wider than this, which can only lead us to deduce that the hardware that it is chosen not to expand towards on this system is because of heat dissipation when this system's in operation. Now, why is that important? Because this makes this quite a mature released NAS. Remember, when I spoke about this NAS here, this NAS had two M.2 SSD slots. It had 10 gigabit Ethernet there, and it did all of that with a not dissimilar chassis to the one we've just talked about. This system got hot. This system got real hot when it was in operation. It was probably one of the most common threads people had about it. And even though it was very powerful and fast, it was still a hot little NAS. This is clearly something they've addressed in this system. And although it's not going to be for everyone that it has those limitations in terms of its scope in hardware architecture, I think it's made quite sensible choices there. And I think QNAP probably have done that for a reason. But let's wrap up today's hardware review. What do I like about this system? Easily. I like its discretion. It's an incredibly small system, and I think it's a much more mature decision than its predecessor. Although I would still argue, me personally, if I was going to pick between them, I'd probably still pick the 453DX personally, but then I'm a power user. What else do I like about this system? I like that it's got 2.5 GBE on a 2-bay. I like the fact that the system itself gives you some variation in how it's been built, and definitely you can clearly see care has been put into making sure it's as silent and as low temp as something can be in this architecture. What do I not like? I don't like the stretching of what that hardware specification can do has not really been achieved in this. I'm not sure I like that 8 gig of memory. I like that it's 8 gig to start with. I don't like that that's as high as things can go. I also don't like the fact it doesn't arrive without remote control as standard. That seems like a miss for me. I also don't like the fact that it hasn't got those SSD bays of its predecessor. I can live without the 10 GBE because this is just a 2-bay NAS, but I would have liked to have seen that combination hard drive and SSD bays, something that this exact same architecture has provided on the likes of the 2, the 3 and the 4 and the 6-bay systems of this same product family. But this has been my hardware review of this, the HS-264. There's a full broke down review over on NAS Compares, linked in the description with more images and more details here. Again, if you enjoyed this video, click like. It helps me understand what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. If you want to learn more, do click subscribe as new hardware releases come throughout 2022. And if you are still unsure about what system you are looking for, then do take advantage of the free advice section over on NAS Compares. It's linked in the description. It's manned by two humans, me and Eddie the web guy. It is genuinely free, and we give you free impartial advice. There's donate buttons. Use them, ignore them. It's totally up to you. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.